My name is Joe Obidzinski, and I'm the program coordinator here at WVU Jackson's Mill. We're here in the Blaker grist mill. This is a working 1790s water-powered grist mill here located at Jackson's Mill in our historic area. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about milling, and we're going to talk a little bit about the process, and we're going to talk a little bit about how this mill and other mills like it would work, and then we're going to talk about some variations of it and even show you some ways to do it at home. What I want to start with is talking about our mill specifically. Now, what is grist milling? Grist milling is grinding on a large scale. In this region, throughout our history, most of what people were milling was things like corn and wheat. Now, the way that a grist mill works is using giant stones like this to grind things up. Now, in order to use giant stones like this, we have to be able to move them. Well, that is where the mill comes into play, the rest of the building. This giant stone is about 3/4 of a ton, 1,500 pounds. Now, in order to move something of that size, we need large gears and a lot of water to be able to make that work. Now, all of that happens with our mill pond outside, and when the water comes into our mill, it starts to turn our water wheel, and some large gears and the floor beneath me start to move. And once they start to move, our stones start to turn. And that's how the process gets going. Now, in this case, we can see on our giant stone here that this stone has a pattern that's carved into it. This is called the cut or the dress of the stone. This allows the grind that we're going to do to be consistent all the way through. Now, as we can see, there is a giant stone here on top. What we probably can't see is that there is the one on the bottom, and the one on the bottom is a stone that doesn't move. That is called the bed stone. But this top stone is called the runner stone, and that's what would actually turn to provide motion for the grind. Remember, I said the stone starts turning, and that's how we're going to grind everything up. Now, in this case, we have this stone over here set up kind of as a display so that people can see how big the stones are, they can see the pattern that's in them, and these are not stones that we would actually use during our grind. Those are located next to me. But for today, what I want to talk about is this stone right here, and specifically what's right in front of us. And the reason for that is because what we can't see when we have our mill running is we can't see in between our stones. Well, if we were going to use those stones, we would have to have those stones really close together. And when I say really close together, I'm talking about closer than the space between my fingers. And as you can kind of tell, there's not much space there. That's because we're grinding up things like kernels of corn. And as we know, kernels of corn are quite small. It also would mean that this stone on top would actually be flipped over so that its pattern would be running against the one on the bottom while the corn was in between being ground up. Since we're not able to see through stone, I have this display for us so that we can see it. So as you can see the pattern on there, as the stone is turning, that is what it would look like if we could see in between the stone. Obviously we can't, which is why I'm using this. But as everything goes through the middle, it starts to get ground up as everything turns. Well, as it does, more and more continues to go through. Well, as more gets ground up, the stone continues to turn, everything gets worked to the outside, where it finally gets swept along before it drops down a chute where I collect it. Now, a grist mill like this could produce quite a lot of cornmeal and wheat flour or whatever they happen to be grinding up in a day. The amount would depend on how much water they had, how much they had to do, and then how long they wanted to work. In this case, though, this mill can put out quite a lot of product in a short amount of time. So taking a step down from our large grist mill, there were smaller versions of it that existed throughout history. This right here is an example of a slightly smaller one. Well, quite a bit smaller, actually. This is known as a quern, Q-U-E-R-N. It's a Latin term. But basically what it is it is a grist mill, but on a smaller scale. Now, this grist mill, unlike ours, is not water-powered, but rather driven by whoever's running it. In this case, me. Or if you were doing this, it'd be you. Now, in order to make this work, you have to use the large stone. Now, there are still two stones, the one here, and one beneath here that we can't see. And what would happen is, if you were using this to grind corn or wheat or whatever you happen to do, you'd throw it down through the middle, and then you'd start the process of grinding. And the process of grinding sort of worked like this. You'd find a little spot right here, and you'd start to move this all around. And as you did, you'd grind everything up that was in between. Now there was a way to adjust how fine or coarse you wanted things. There are actually little tabs underneath the table that could be knocked in to raise or lower stone in between, but ultimately the process was the same. But again, even something like this is a little large for our homes, so let's take a look at some examples of mills that you could use inside your home and things that you could do yourself if you wanted to try milling at home. So we're back here at our large stone, and in front of me now I have a small hand-cranked mill. And what we see here is we see, just like in the other examples, two stones. The one here on the bottom and the one here on the top. And as you might be able to tell, there's a pattern on this bottom, or on this top one, and on this bottom one as well. Now the setup is actually very simple, and the way that it works is very straightforward, just like all of the other stuff. And as we talked about before, all of the meal as it comes out, or all the corn as it gets ground up, goes to the outside, and then in this case there's just a small hole here which is where all of the stuff that you grind up will come out the bottom. Now I'm going to set this up and then we'll see how it works. Now that we have this set up, what we'll do now is we will grind something up. Now we don't have water in this case, but as we saw in our last example, you don't have to have water power when you can use the power of your own strength. So in this case, what we do is we just move this around and we just keep turning it until we get a nice grind that we're interested in. As we go around, you can make your adjustments as it happens. And as it spins, more of that corn will go in between the stones, and more will continue to grind up as it happens. Now as we grind this around, because we don't have a large stone, if you need to grind it a little bit further, you can put it through again, adjust it a little finer, and then you can grind it a little bit more. This is all about preference, so you can grind this as fine or as coarse as you'd like. But you're doing the exact same process that we were using with the big stones here in the mill and in our last example with the corn. So if you don't have a home version of this and you'd like to do this yourself, they do have variations online of small little mills like this. Some of them even have small motors inside that'll do it for you, be a little bit easier. But again, there are definitely ways to do this at home. But there's even one more traditional way of actually grinding things up, and that actually predates grist mills themselves, which themselves go back a few thousand years. So let's take a look at that before we finish up here. We're going to talk about one of the oldest types of ways to grind. This in front of me is a mortar and pestle. This is made of granite, but you can find ones of various different kinds. But very simply, it is a stone bowl and a small rounded stone, and the idea is that much like our stones in the mill when they're spinning, we will take some of our corn, put it down in the bowl, and then we essentially just have to start working and grinding everything up. Now as you can see, this is going to take quite a bit of work, and it's very obvious to anyone why, when people realized that they could do this by running large grist mills and large stones, how much quicker it would be, how much easier it would be, and how much less work it would be on them, they quickly gravitated to that. But again, if you have something like this in your home and you grind anything up, you are essentially doing what a grist mill does. You're just doing it on a smaller scale. So if you ever are working in the kitchen and you're grinding something up like this, just know that you're a miller too, even if you don't have a big grist mill. Now because mine's not running today, I got some more milling to do. So I'll see you all next time. Thanks for joining.